everyone, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening to you all, and thanks for making the time to join our last, what we think will be our last webinar for 2019. So my name is Sally Defor. You will appear as George Fenton for you all because I'm using George's account to host the webinar today. As you can all see, it's about upcoming disruptive changes in ocean freight, which we are hosting together with Geodis. And of course, we've got a representative of Hapag-Lloyd also joining to present. So they will be able to introduce themselves in a bit, but I'll pass on to George, who is also on the call today, and then he can give us some introduction to this webinar. So George, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sally. Yes, so I'm George Fenton. I'm the Chief Executive of the Humanitarian Logistics Association, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar on upcoming disruptive changes in ocean freight, which has been organized with our corporate partner Geodis as part of our series of webinars and workshops on environmentally sustainable logistics, which introduce ways that humanitarian relief and development organizations can reduce carbon emissions in their supply chains. We recognize that disaster preparedness, response, and development initiatives depend upon effective logistics and supply chain management. And as a membership organization, HLA acts as a neutral cross-sector connection platform, share knowledge and advocate for good practice to support humanitarian logistics professionals, relief and development organizations, communities, and non-logistics individuals who respond to crisis. Our speakers today will provide you with information about the International Maritime Organization, the latest developments and regulations to tackle carbon and sulfur dioxide emissions in shipping, and the impact that this will have on ocean freight. We believe that humanitarian and development organizations should ensure that they can play a role in combating climate change, and so should keep abreast of the latest information and innovations taking place globally, in this case related to ocean freight, to ensure that their interventions are as environmentally sustainable and carbon neutral as is feasible. New initiatives and innovations are not an end in themselves, of course, and need to be integrated into existing policies and programs. So we must consider issues such as infrastructure and service availability, where possible, keeping logistics interventions responsible and appropriate while planning for sustainability and scalability. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers today. We have with us today Marie-Isabelle Dupré, who is the Global Account Manager at Hapag-Lloyd AG, Florence Gautret, who is Director of Global Freight at Geodis Freight Forwarding, and Edith Mazoya, who is the Global Account Manager for Aid and Relief at Geodis. So I would like to hand over to Edith, and I'm sure you will find the webinar extremely interesting and valuable. And following the presentations, we look forward to answering as many of your questions as we have time for. Thank you very much for joining.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce this webinar to you on maritime changes. We will go shortly into the IMO description and what is the International Maritime Organization. We will then have a spot on the IMO 2020 and the impacts of IMO 2020 on ocean freight. Then we will look at the trends and the worldwide trade lanes. And as a last point, we will have a focus on African trade lanes, which will be made by Florence. Can you please move to the next slide, Sally? Thanks. So IMO, next, what is IMO? Next, Sally, please. Thank you. So IMO is for the International Maritime Organization. it is a specialized agency which is part of the United Nations. And this was created in 1948, and the role of IMO is to create a regulatory framework for the shipping industry. This framework needs to be fair, effective, and universally adopted and implemented. The overall objectives of IMO are speaking for themselves into their slogan, which is safe, secure, and efficient shipping on clean oceans. This organization of the UN, no, can you move back? Thank you. This organization of the UN is the only specialized agency which has its HQ in the UK, and currently there are 170 states which are members of the IMO. So knowing that the international shipping transports more than 80% of the global trade over the world, we can assess how important the work of IMO is in this scope. So IMO measures cover all aspects of international shipping, including also ship design, construction, equipment, and all these kind of operation and disposal features. And they ensure that the sector remains safe, environmentally sound, energy efficient, and secured. So as part of the UN family, of course, IMO is actively working towards the 2030 agenda of UN for sustainable development. And since its creation, IMO has promoted the adoption of some 50 conventions and protocols and adopted more than 1,000 codes and recommendations concerning maritime safety and security and the prevention of pollution and related matters. We will see in the IMO 2020 initiative an example and a direct impact of the work of IMO. Next, Sally, please, if you want to know more about IMO, they issue each trimester a newspaper. So the autumn one has been issued on the 29th of October. So you have in their news the feedback from meetings, some press about the special topics they are raising. So if you want to dig further into the actions of IMO. But for today, next, the focus will be on IMO 2020 initiative, which will be described by Marie-Isabelle. So I will hand over to Marie-Isabelle now.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So thank you. My name is Marie-Isabelle, and thanks to George for the introduction. So maybe we can move on to the next slide. So today I would like to tell you something, or just in general, will give you a general overview about IMO 2020. So can we move on? Thanks. Yeah. So let's say at the beginning 2020, all carriers are requested to use the fuel with 0.5 low sulfur fuel oil, or even less than that. So currently we are already using 0.1 low sulfur fuel oil for the emission control areas, which you see on the map marked in orange, which means that it's already implemented for North America, East Coast, Gulf, West Coast, and also some Caribbean ports, and as well for the Northern Europe ports. So for several ports in China and also Hong Kong, the 0.1 low sulfur fuel oil is still under review, still under discussion. So beginning of 2020, there's a must to make use of minimum 0.5 low sulfur fuel oil, and there will be only one option to use the high sulfur fuel oil of 3.5%, which we are currently still using. but only with the exception to use scrubber to align the IMO 2020 regulation. So could we move on to the next slide, please? So the main goal of the International Maritime Organization is to reduce emissions to make shipping greener. So that means that all carriers need to use minimum 0.5 low sulfur fuel oil. So, okay, what kind of options do we have to reduce the emission and to becoming cleaner? So there are 3 different options we can choose of. The first option would be using the required fuels. So in the view of Hapag-Lloyd, most of our fleet will use or will stick to the 0.5 low sulfur fuel oil. And because we think it's the most environment friendly way. So there would be also a second option, which would be LNG, so the liquefied natural gas. We only have one pilot vessel, which will reinstall to LNG. So yeah, LNG is not that easy for the carrier because unfortunately not each and every vessel can use LNG. So they need a specific engine to use LNG. There's another disadvantage for us as carrier because they need an extra tank which needs to be installed on the vessel, which is of course reducing the overall capacity of the vessel. And also in point of view of the availability of LNG, it's not available at each and every port. So the third option would be to use scrubber. What does it mean? We will add a filter to clean the exhaust gas of the vessel. In the view of Hapag-Lloyd, we will fit 10 of our vessels with scrubber. Can we move on, please? So IMO 2020 starts already in Q4 2019. So we have already started to fuel our vessels with the 0.5 low sulfur fuel oil. So it's also depending like on the transit time of the vessels. For example, when we have a vessel which is sailing around intra-Asia, of course, they need a fuel shortly before because in general, we have a transit time in intra-Asia of 5 days only. And then we have the next port call where we have the availability, where we have the possibility to fuel our vessels. So when we just compare intra-Asia vessels with vessels who's starting from Hamburg to Shanghai, with the transit time of 30 days or even longer than that, we don't have any possibility to fuel the vessel during the journey because most of our vessels have a direct connection from Hamburg to Shanghai without any transshipment. So this is a little bit depending on the transit time of the vessels. Other factors are also like capacity or the current stock of high sulfur fuel oil, and also the cleaning process of the tanks need to be taken in consideration. There will be a transition period between 1st of January until end of February, where the carriers can still use the remaining fuel, but it's definitely not possible to fuel the high sulfur fuel oil 3.5 only when the vessel is equipped with scrubber. So could we move on to the, yes, thank you. So it's really depending from carrier to carrier which kind of options they use. So on the view of Hapag-Lloyd, we will focus mainly on option 1 and 2, which means LNG and compliant fuel. And because we are just thinking that the scrubber technology has been considered as too complex and with high cost and does only show low impact. So we also see the availability of the high sulfur fuel oil of 3.5 is not known in the future. So maybe the fuel will not available anymore. So as you also see from the top 10 carriers like Hapag-Lloyd, Maersk, only 2% of their vessels will be fitted with scrubber. So that means that overall, only 5% of the market will use this technology. So I would say we can move on to Florence.
So, hello everybody, my name is Florence and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to dig into the detail of the impact of IMO 2020. The first impact is certainly the increase of the cost of transport linked to the new regulation, meaning the fuel 0.5 compliant is come to the market at a higher cost of a fuel with a 3.5% sulfur. So this is one point to consider, but there is obviously more to that, and certainly in terms of potential disruption. Next. Where we see potential disruption in the supply chain linked to IMO 2020 is the first point is non-compliant fuel available at a port. Processes are currently implemented to ensure a consistent supply of compliant fuel, and the sharing of information between the states member on reporting compliant fuel supply issue is critical for the shipping industry, as they will need to refuel at the port. A second potential disruption is the port infrastructure themselves. The port will monitor ships for compliance, meaning that they will need to take appropriate measures to ensure compliance and to conduct the initial inspection that will start officially 1st of March. This is currently under testing in many ports and particularly in the African port, as this is also part of our subject today. The potential inspection might also encounter delays in the call and in the transit time of the vessel. So currently, all possible efforts are planned to be made to avoid ships being delayed or detained as a result of IMO 2020 implementation. However, delays may be inevitable where ships are only in port for several hours currently, and the premium and initiative and implementation of the inspection may delay and make longer the calls of the ship at the port. So these are the three main potential disruptions that we see in the maritime industry, in addition to the impact on the total cost of transport in the shipping industry that we need to be considered in 2020, starting as Marie-Isabelle explained already in Q4 2019. We will now have a look on the different trade lane and capacity on the market. So we will have a look at the global capacity, and we can see that the global capacity in terms of containers continue to increase, or has continued to increase throughout 2019, which has represented a 4% growth versus 2018. And the cap of of 23 million TEUs has been passed the last week of September 2019. In terms of growth per region, we have a global container market that show a very low development in the first half of 2019, with a 1.33% market growth versus last year. The global container market forecasting for second half of 2019 remains low and most probably at the very same level as the first half. In terms of trade and region, Europe trade, import and export continue to present a positive growth, while Asia and North America trade show a slight decrease versus 2018. South America, Oceania, Indian, Pakistan subcontinent and Middle East trade show on year-to-date 2019 negative growth versus last year, meaning the demand is low on this trend and certainly lower than last year in terms of growth. We might have a look now at the African trade lane. The maritime trade to Africa overall continues to increase and we can see the growth here from 2012 to 2018. The Africa spot counts for approximately 4% of global maritime containerized trade volume. Europe remains certainly Africa's major trading partner. Also, the share of Europe has decreased in the past year, and China and Asia in general, market share with Africa has increased. If we are broken down by region, Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, and Western Africa have slightly increased their market share in world container market, while Southern Africa has slightly decreased this last 5 years. When we look at the trade and growth and connection, we are also looking at how the ports are connected among themselves, as this is where the vessel and capacity will be deployed. Few African ports still can accommodate large vessels. The best connected countries in Africa are those that at its corner, meaning Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa. Western Africa has relatively still low connectivity because basically it doesn't lie at the crossroads of major north-south or east-west shipping routes. We can see Mombasa, Dar es Salaam that connect Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda to overseas market through dedicated corridors. However, they remain highly congested due to the lack of, sometimes the lack of infrastructure to carry the container to the internal African point. In terms of Africa top 10 surf port, Tanger Med is the highest port in terms of number of line services calling. Then comes Port Said, Durban, and then Cotonou, Casablanca, and Lomé. This excludes services that are only operated in Mediterranean and services, meaning we are talking long-haul services here in terms of liner services. While we look into the trade from Asia to Africa, we have increasing trade in terms of services, and we can see that the activity sourcing from Asia into Africa has increased in terms of TU capacity and allocated capacity by 26% between 2014 and 2019, explaining and demonstrating the increase of the market share from China and overall Asia into Africa overall. Edith, to you?
Yes, you can see the sources from which we extracted the different information that we shared. I think, Sally, you can now launch for question and answers. I don't know if you have some already in which have been raised by the participants.
Well, thank you all for that. Okay, so we now, I guess, go on to the question and answers. And so let me see who has been writing in. Okay. But I do have one. So you have identified some trends across the various regions, Asia and Africa in particular. Do you foresee more disruptions in some areas compared to others based on these trends, and how so?
So Florence speaking. I will answer this question. We may see other disruptions that are linked not necessarily directly to IMO 2020, but most likely to economical discussion and commercial discussion, like we can encounter currently between China and the US. The second part would be certainly new customs barrier that can also be implemented. This has definitely an impact on where the capacity from the industry is deployed, and how the demand will affect also the capacity.
Right, okay. So Kenneth from Nairobi wants to know how the IMO 2020 initiative will affect humanitarian logistics operation now that there are disruptions.
So Marie-Isabelle speaking, I would say IMO 2020 is affecting worldwide. So also for the humanitarian logistics. So we don't know the exact impact of IMO 2020 yet, but there will be definitely some increasing costs, which definitely need to absorb by the industry. And so increasing bunker prices, and also like if the product is not available, we have to switch to the 0.1 low sulfur fuel oil, but currently we don't know the exact impact we currently have from IMO 2020. So currently all carriers are now fueling the new product. So there's a high demand on this product, and of course high demand and higher prices. So but unfortunately, so we cannot share any impact of IMO 2020 yet.
Right.
Just Sally, just to complete this answer,
Okay.
if you want to know more about the analysis which have been made, for instance, by the Boston Consulting Group, they have on their site, they have made a full paper on just how disruptive will IMO 2020 be, and they are raising different scenarios and different consequences which could pop up. That goes very much into details, into the potential disruptions that will pop up, but it's an interesting article to go through. So it's on the site of the BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and if you type on Google just how disruptive will IMO 2020 be, Boston Consulting Group, you will find this long paper that they have written.
Right, and I think when we write back to you with the link to this recording, we should also be able to include links to any other resources that Edith has identified. So Paul wants to know what you can share regarding the cost impact from IMO 2020.
As Marie-Isabelle explained, the final cost impact is not known yet. At the time that the industry gets organized to refuel and get access to the low sulfur fuel, there is a tendency from the different index which are public, that the cost between the high sulfur and the low sulfur, the difference of the cost is approximately today, as we speak, around 35%. How this 35% will materialize, this is not yet known. Whether this will be 30 or 50% will be totally officialized during the month of December. So what we know today is that there is the low sulfur fuel is definitely comes at a higher cost than the high sulfur, and currently the difference is 35% from the different public index that are available from the different websites.
Right. Okay. So I was wondering, how well do you think the humanitarian logistics actors in space is conscious of the impact, and whether they are in fact prepared for it in terms of the cost impact, in terms of immediate impact or current ongoing relief efforts in different parts of the world? How prepared do you think they are, or how conscious do you think they are of the potential disruptions that this could have on their work?
I can take this one for a part of it, Sally. From what I see around through the different NGOs they are not really aware of this new regulation.
Mm-hmm.
It will strongly impact humanitarian flows because, as it was presented by Marie-Isabelle, the harbors which have the highest transition to do are located in Africa, and we know that the flows for humanitarian aid is landing in Africa most of the time. So we know there will be a strong impact due to where they come from, where they have to go to. And we know the NGOs are not really aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
It will have an impact in terms of cost, definitely, even if we do not know what the 30 to 35% fuel price increase, what it will be in terms of final price for the flows, but definitely in terms of budget, it will impact. So transport will cost more. And the second impact is also linked to the availability and the capacity of vessels. So there might be a reduction in the number of vessels available to operate those flows. So that's the most impacts on humanitarian. There is a big difference between I would say the level of information of the NGOs and the bigger entities. Of course, World Food Programme, these kind of entities are well aware and they have been preparing it. But for the NGOs, if they need further support or information, I think we have to know, because they are not really informed at the moment.
Right. Well, so Kenneth has another question. What controls are you putting in place to ensure compliance with IMO 2020 initiative? I guess what he means is what measures generally are being put in place to ensure that the different actors actually comply with these changes.
Okay, I will answer this one. Florence speaking. All the ocean carrier welcome the ocean industry to be more sustainable and accompany and welcome the measure to have a greener shipping industry. And none of them can afford not to be compliant with the new regulation. And that goes a little bit with the next question. what are the risks in terms of non-compliance. So the inspection of the vessel will be done by the port authorities when the vessel calls the port. Whenever there is, as of 1st of March, whenever there is a vessel that is not compliant, there will be a report of non-compliance that will be issued, and the risk, and the very high risk, is then that the vessel is retained of a further voyage, which then will cause directly and indirectly a lot of disruption to the ocean carrier and to the customer of the ocean carrier. So that's why the industry gets prepared in terms of resources and infrastructure to ensure that the vessel are compliant and that the port authorities are equipped to carry this inspection, and that the vessel is not delayed or is not retained because of non-compliance. In case that the vessel is for any reason non-compliant, because of fuel non-availability and etc. Yes, there are some sanctions that are planned by the IMO organization, which at that stage, from my mind, I cannot share, but this is something we can look into if you want to know more. So what we need to keep in mind is that all the stakeholders in the ocean freight industry make all the effort to comply with this new regulation, because none of them can afford not to be compliant.
Right. Okay, so Paul's question, you mentioned possible delays due to audits while in port. What are the most likely sanctions carriers could face if found to be non-compliant? Will it be financial or it will be operational?
This will be both.
It will be both.
Yes, meaning that if the ship is not compliant, that will also have a disruption in the overall voyage of the ship. So if a ship coming from Asia, transitioning through Singapore before or Dubai before touching African port and not recognized compliant in Dubai, then the vessel will be stopped, and the goods and containers that are expecting to arrive in Africa then will be delayed.
Right. Okay,
so the operation will be disruptive for both the carrier and the customer of the carriers.
Exactly. Right, so this question is directed at Marie-Isabelle. Paul wants to know, are you, as Hapag-Lloyd, yourself ensuring that any feeders using your network are going to be compliant? I don't know if you're in a position to answer this, Marie.
Yes, of course. Also, the feeder vessel need to stick to the IMO 2020 regulations. So definitely, we as Hapag-Lloyd need to ensure that they stick to those. So currently, we are still in discussion also with our partners, so that everything is ready till IMO, till next year 2020. So yeah.
Right. I hope, Paul, that answers your question. So I was also wondering, how practical do you think is this transition period to get everything in place? You mentioned between January and February, there'll be opportunities, of course, to be able to ensure that all the stipulated changes are made. How practical and feasible do you think this is?
Yeah, Marie-Isabelle speaking. Yeah, there are 2 months from January until end of February where we have the transition period, and where the carriers are still allowed to use the fuel they have still. So it's not, you know, what I mentioned with the transit time, it's not easy to make everything fixed until 1st of January 2020. So therefore we are just have the transition period to have still 2 months more to to fuel the vessels with the 0.5 low sulfur fuel, so that we are definitely ready beginning of March, beginning of the 1st of March. So it's not like so easy from one of the other day to make everything ready then. So therefore I think the transition period of 2 months is a good solution to be ready for IMO 2020.
Right, okay. George, any clarifications while we wait?
No, I think that's been very, very useful presentation and a very good series of questions that were asked, and very many thanks to Kenneth and Paul particularly for posing those useful questions. I don't have anything further to add at this point.
Well, let me interrupt with another question that just came in. Will the bills of lading carry a statement confirmation that the transport contract is undertaken in full compliance with IMO 2020, or is it simply being implied that that is the case as of 2020? Will there be something to show or evidence this compliance?
Florence speaking. For Geodis as a NVOCC and cargo container line bill of lading is concerned, we have not planned to mention or make a statement on our bill of lading that the contract is undertaken in full compliance with IMO 2020, but that might be a good idea. So thank you for this. This is definitely imply as a transport, as a freight forwarder, that we will definitely use only ocean carriers that are compliant with IMO 2020, and this is part of the selection of the carrier that will be part of our contract. So this is a new, let's say, mandatory scenario when we make deals with ocean carrier.
Right. Okay. So Edith, anything else in particular you want to add to your earlier points?
No, there was no specific point that I wanted to add. As Florence said, I think as part of the regular conversation, NGOs and humanitarian transport and logistic buyers need to have with their freight forwarders is to make sure that their freight forwarders is including this IMO 2020 compliance into the contract with the carriers, just to avoid the complexities that Florence has explained of having goods blocked at ports or these kind of things. So that would be a recommendation for the NGOs to include this question in the meetings or in the quotes they are requesting to their freight forwarders to ensure that they are asking their carriers to be compliant.
Right. Okay. Usman, will you prefer to speak and then I could allow you to talk and ask your question? Would that be easier for you? Okay, so he wants to know how many agencies are in Central Africa to, I imagine, to handle? I think we didn't get the full question, so I don't know what he means, but he wanted to know how many agencies are in Central Africa to, I can't guess what specifically this is referring to. Does anybody know and want to answer?
I'm not sure I'm getting. I'm not sure I'm getting this man's question regarding flows which have a destination to Central Africa. They are mainly landing in Kenya most of the time. We are looping back to the recommendation that NGOs, when they are ordering a freight between Europe and Kenya, whatever, should ask their freight forwarder to be sure that the carrier, the shipping lines, is IMO 2020 compliant. In terms of IMO agency, IMO is an organization of the UN. So I'm not sure I'm getting the point regarding IMO agency in Central Africa.
Right, okay, same here. All right, okay, so another question did come in. They seem to be trickling in. Operationally, is a carrier going to perform tests on the fuel before taking it in? With the old bunker, I guess no one really cared much about the composition. No one cared much about the composition of the fuel. But obviously with these new changes, that is of course a consideration. So it'll be dependent on the max sulfur content. So you can't simply trust that what is being offered is compliant. So will there be actual tests performed on the fuel before taking it in at the ports?
Okay, Florence speaking. I will answer that question. The IMO 2020 is not the first regulation from the International Maritime Organization to make the ocean industry more sustainable. Mm-hmm. Currently, the current regulation is 3.5%, and this has been implementing in 2012. So it's not the statement that that the composition of the fuel today is not looked into is not totally correct, because there is already regulation. Okay, we go from a regulation from 3.5 to 0.5. So in a more stricter way of sulfur emission, and in a way of decarbonize even more the shipping industry. The concept is of the 0.5% is another step, and a big step into that direction for the maritime industry to be carbon free by 2030 and onwards. And this is a big step, and this is why we have this challenge. Yes, the carrier, obviously, these last 3 months have done a lot of tests for the various 3 options that we have described. A lot of tests has been done and still being done on the various geography, with the various fuel available with the various supplier of the fuel, obviously. So this is part of the process and the transitioning and the cost of the transitioning to be ready for the 1st of January 2020.
Right, thank you. That's a really useful insights for those of us who don't know more about how these changes will impact the work of humanitarian logistics. So thanks for the opportunity to be able to discuss that. George, over to you for some closing remarks, and we can wrap up the webinar for today.
Thank you very much, Sally, and thank you very much to our speakers today. Very interesting presentation, and yes, I learned a lot about IMO myself, so that's good. So I just would like to close by saying that, of course, knowledge is really important to the future success of humanitarian logistics services. And so support from our network is really important for the Humanitarian Logistics Association. And so if you or you know other people who are not members already of the HLA, I would ask that you encourage them to join, either as an individual or, of course, as a corporate member. And so with that, I would also remind you that you can get more information from our website, humanitarianlogistics.org. And I thank you all for joining our webinar today.
Right. So thank you and have a good day. Bye for now.